if the family have gone to this length to say they will not betray their father, she will not betray her husband, they will not betray their uncle, in terms of badging to some of the things that he held dear up to a point of his death, don't we then as a nation, collectively, including Wisaka and Echirema, sit back and reflect what has gone wrong? Why are we treating each other like this? What are some of the fundamental issues that we need to correct? Not for the sake of Edgar Chagwa Lungu, but for the sake of the future. Okay. And I think that's a direction should be taken.
What's up? My name is Ken Dumbo, the MC with the sauce. Don't forget to subscribe to JQ.
Well, as we continue to react to that particular issue, we are joined by Zambian main opposition parties, the Patriotic Front, the Secretary General, Mr. Raphael Nakacinda, is in studio with us. Mr. Nakacinda, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a tumultuous period for the party and also for the family. But I'm keen to hear just the initial reaction that you get as a party to what we heard in court today, but also when we did hear that the Zambian Attorney General, Mulilo Kabesha, was approaching the courts to halt the burial of the former president in South Africa. What was the initial reaction?
Well, I think it's we are somewhat shocked at the insistence and obsession by the government. But of course, it's obsession by the president himself in wanting to take charge and possess the whole process of putting to rest His Excellency President Edgar Chagwa Lungu. Prior to today, there has been engagements between the family and government. They were very clear, demands or at least conditions that the family had given to government, which were a reflection of the wish or will of the late, in view of, I think, the background that I've already, discussed. And in a deceptive manner, government would agree to those conditions and, even agree to address the nation through the press, through press briefings. And immediately things are set in motion. The programs and some of the pronouncements that come from government back home basically vacates or negates all the conditions or agreements that were made. And to that effect, the family was finding it difficult to proceed in view of the fact that it looks like government was more interested in politicizing this whole process. When you look at the propaganda machinery, online, media pages or, outlets that are run by State House, would run very, very disturbing propaganda, stories. Such as the fact that, the late president actually came with a different identity. He got, a passport from Zimbabwe. They are not even sensitive to what such propaganda would do to our, diplomatic relations with neighboring countries like Zimbabwe. So that, approach only speaks to the fact that our government, while they are trying to, play to the gallery and say they are interested in having his remains repatriated to Zambia, given a dignified, send-off to the international community, what is happening on the ground is totally different. The same ridicule, mockery that he was subjected to when he was alive, it has continued. Of course, the president will be saying one thing, but those associated to him are saying a totally different thing. You even have a spokesperson of government, for example, suggesting that these people amass so much wealth through dubious means, basically theft or corruption, and therefore the decision to try and bury outside the country is because of certain, ulterior motives, trying to suggest that the family was, advancing conditions around matters that some of the family members of the late are facing in court, all fabricated to try and paint a bad picture of the late as well as the Patriotic Front and the family, which I think is very, very deceptive and hypocritical
At
of
the
those
same
other
time,
government.
though, so I'm going to speak about the official communication that we've seen from the Zambian government, right? Last week, the Zambian government halting what they had announced to be a period of mourning for former President Lungu. I mean, there was a sense that the Zambian government, through that very statement that they shared, were waiting for the former president to come back home to Zambia. There'd been a period of mourning. They said they even extended that period of mourning in Zambia. In fact, at the end of that statement, they go on to talk about how Lungu is still very much a statesman who belongs to Zambia and should be buried within the borders of Zambia. So, I mean, are you saying that warm statement that we see from Zambia is misleading?
You can only judge the present by examining the historical facts around these issues. First of all, the current president, even when he was in opposition, he never recognized President Lungu as Republican president. He actually refused, not for 1 month, for a period of 5 years, and then until he got into government. When President Lungu left office, I think the facts were presented. Today, for him to open his mouth, all of a sudden, in a dramatic manner, and start pronouncing that President Lungu is a statesman, is hypocritical. I think the issue is not just a standoff between the family and the government on the basis of the fact that President Lungu was mistreated. I think that is narrowing the argument. There are a number of fundamental issues that have gone wrong in Zambia, to which the family at this particular point are basically just contributing to the fact that can we open a conversation? Taking President Lungu to Zambia to be buried, does it change the issues that we're dealing with as a country? And here in South Africa, you had the issue of apartheid at some point. You had people in exile in Zambia. We hosted, the headquarters of ANC was in Zambia. And some of the comrades and freedom fighters died in Zambia and buried in Zambia.
Indeed, and I'm going to challenge you, Mr. Nakacinda. Yes, they did, and that is correct.
Yeah, it is correct.
That was not at that point when we were talking about a former statesman, which is a completely different thing. So maybe let's talk about the diplomatic sensitivities. The spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa talked about what a difficult position this puts South Africa in, because this is going to be the first time a former statesman or a statesman is buried in South Africa from outside, a statesman of another country. The question for Durko was, what do we do? Do we partake in the funeral? Do we lay a South African flag over his remains? Because that is the protocols that we have. So what do you say about those diplomatic governmental sensitivities?
Unless people are not paying attention to the issues around President Edgar Chaka, you are trying to cloth a person, the status of statesman, clothing the status of a former president that needs to be buried in a dignified manner, without paying attention to the fact that up to the point of him dying, he was stripped off of all these courtesies that we're trying to pronounce at this particular point. So don't you think that outside just moving forward and say, let's bury him in a dignified manner, as people are trying to suggest, that we need, first of all, to address what has led to where we are today, and the choice of the family to say, I think in this case, we don't want to participate in advancing and perpetuating this hypocrisy because it's destroying the very fabric of a nation. A nation needs to be founded on very strong, values, the values of, truth, the values, in this case, where democracy, where institutions of government must be respected. Where, for example, the courts, the parliament, and all these institutions that are critical to be able to keep a nation, balanced and having freedoms and rights of citizens respected. Should we just, accord this government, an opportunity without being interrogated around this issue that will not only cure the abuse of the rights and freedoms of President Lungu, but the abuse and rights of citizens in the Republic of Zambia? So it's bigger than just burying.
Right.
So everybody who's interested in dealing with the Zambian situation must be able to examine this matter in a broader sense, so that we'll be able to accept that there is something fundamentally wrong about Zambia. one of the reasons why people are reluctant to interrogate is because Zambia for over 50-something to 60 years has had a clean slate. We have been pioneers and leading on, in many areas. We have been in the forefront in terms of advocating for peace in the region. We have been first in terms of introduction of multi-party democracy. Then a number of positive things that Zambia has been able, to achieve and has been celebrated in the region and on the continent. Now, the dark side of what is happening now is shocking and people can't believe. So when we are raising these concerns, when President Lungu was raising these concerns, people can't believe. This doesn't really speak to the Zambia we know.
Is it not the loss of the legacy then of a former statesman that you believe in, his ideals, right? As a representative of the Patriotic Front, that it is a loss of legacy for him to be buried in another country. So let's say that the family is able to have the green light on their wishes to have former President Lungu buried in South Africa. Would he be buried as a normal citizen? I
think understanding where the family is coming from is not actually the loss of a legacy. It is a demand that the legacy of President Edgar Lungu not be rubbished. Can you let the world know, let the Zambian people know who this man is, not in the lenses or through the lenses of the propaganda of the UPND government. Now President HH is coming to the party and beginning to accept that which he has not accepted for many years. And he's accepting now conveniently because for him, closure to this issue as quickly as possible works for him. And we're saying we cannot put closure, and I think that's what the family is also saying, we cannot put closure to this matter in the manner that he wishes it to close, because it's not about him. He is only president for a period of time. It's about the country, the damage the man is causing to a number of issues that are fundamental for the country. If not stopped at this particular point, soon, even those who are today are looking at these issues just from a perspective that they are, internal issues of Zambia, they need to be resolved by Zambia. But if anything happens in Zambia, it will affect the region.
Yes.
It will affect the continent.
Yes.
And we're saying, can we all pay attention to what's going on in Zambia? The burial of President Lungu is just an opportunity, I think, through the decision that the family has made, for us to be able to ask ourselves the question, what has gone wrong?
But
how are we getting to a place that now we're having to bury a former head of state, a statesman, out of, in South Africa instead of
the question is, would he be buried in South Africa as a normal citizen and not as a statesman? I ask that because the South African government made available the protocols as per South African governmental protocols to transport him back home as a statesman. So if the family insists that he be buried in South Africa, is he buried in South Africa as a citizen? And that's the clarity that I'm looking as a normal citizen and not as a statesman is what I'm looking
I think the family has made it very clear. They have never demanded for anything outside the fact that up to the point of death, the gentleman was just like a private citizen. He lived here from January up to the time of death like a private citizen.
Okay.
And to that effect, there's nobody who has demanded anything. But having been president, they are fellow presidents. Some of them are sitting, others who are former presidents, who know President Lungu because they worked with him over regional matters, continental matters, and global matters. They know who he is. And they would be reluctant to fall for the propaganda coming from Zambia, at least from the ruling party and the government from there. And they'll be wanting to treat him and honor him based on what they know of him. But we're saying, as much as you are interested to do that, and I think even South Africa has done that, because they appreciate the input this man has made, not only on the regional level, the continental level, and therefore there's this compelling desire that he needs to be honored, and is highly appreciated. If he was just some dictator, some a leader that really didn't espouse values that would be appreciated in the region, I don't think South Africa would have even found itself in an awkward position. I hope you understand where I'm coming from.
Sure.
The only reason South Africa is saying we're in an awkward position is because they do know that President Lungu deserves honor.
Let me
in
ask
Zambia,
you this,
that is not a position.
After the sitting in court today, and we played it in the clip a little bit earlier, seemingly a family member saying one of the concerns for the family is the remains of the former president make their way back to Zambia, and that President Chilema asks to view the body. What is the biggest concern about that possible request as is raised by that family member?
I think it has raised issues that, or maybe concerns that I may not be competent to discuss around the desire and obsession by the president to have, to view the body, to be the first one to review the body, and even maybe have some indication from the program that they had come out, some kind of private session, around, all that process. Because somehow it begins to delve into superstition, which is really a subject that I will not want to...
That's not a subject we want to get into. But there is the issue of cultural sensitivities.
Yeah, there are cultural sensitivities.
Someone made the point that we are Africans, we have cultural sensitivities.
Yes, around all these issues.
Right.
And
the former president's been passed since the 5th of June. It's been 20 days. And now, according to the courts, they're going to sit again in August. So more time that the former president's remains will be not laid to rest. Is that a cultural concern for the family, surely?
Well, I think we have a process which is in court. Outside discussing cultural concerns and so on, for the party, and I think for me as Secretary General, I see that this presents an opportunity for our country to reflect and look at the issues. Not just this ping-pong of wanting to outdo each other in terms of sentiments and narratives and propaganda and all that. What has led us to reach here? That's a question that President HH must ask and answer. And if we are serious about, curing some of the issues that have led us to this place, a process of conversation around this matter will start. The negotiations, for example, between the family and government have been purely around wanting to reduce this, as though it's government trying to appease the family for them to, participate or basically take charge of the burial process. But the issues that President Lungu, for which he came out of retirement and, into active politics, for him to even sacrifice his life, even at a point of his weakness, even when surely death seemed to have been knocking at the door, but you're still resolute that you needed to contribute. Those are the issues that we should be able to discuss and be able to resolve. Because how would you, justify that a man would say, I don't think this is a country I would want to go back to. I don't think this is a government I would want that even participate in wanting to, the hypocritical, attitude that we seem to harbor in our country, that somebody will be demonized to their death. And then in their death, people are beginning to celebrate, celebrate that person. I remember something I think that on the continent was quite appreciated about, our mother here, Mama Winnie Mandela, when she died. My good friend, Malema, was given an opportunity to speak. He seemed to have he had the courage to call out some of the people who he felt that even the songs of praise and all the statements and so on that they were presenting over somebody they were demonizing all this while were hypocritical. It raised the debate. It is in the same spirit that we're saying, wait a minute, if the family have gone to this length to say they will not betray their father, she will not betray her husband, they will not betray their uncle, in terms of budging to some of the things that he held dear up to a point of his death. Don't we then, as a nation, collectively, including Wisaka and Echilema, sit back and reflect what has gone wrong? Why are we treating each other like this? What are some of the fundamental issues that we need to correct? Not for the sake of Edgar Chagwa Lungu, but for the sake of the future. And I think that's a direction should be taken.
Mr. Nakacinda, we really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We'll be watching the engagements between yourselves, the Lungu family, as well as the Zambian government very closely, of course, even as it plays out in the court. Thank you for availing yourself once again.
Thank you and good evening.
Let me know what you think about this video. Thanks for tuning in to JQ News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates on tech, politics, and everything in between. Until next time, stay cool.